Stand in the middle of Nicosia and open Google Maps. Your blue dot glitches. On one side, you're in the European Union. On the other, Turkish soldiers patrol the streets. Same road, two different worlds. The map can't decide where you are, because half a century later, no one has. Not exactly the GPS update Brussels promised. Berlin tore down its wall. Belfast dismantled its checkpoints. But in Cyprus, Europe's last divided capital still has a razor wire cutting through the centre. And strangely, the longer it stays divided, the more valuable it becomes. In the early 70s, a UN ceasefire line carved through Cyprus, slicing a capital city in half and freezing the island in time. But what looks like a political deadlock is really a business opportunity. Turkey keeps 40,000 troops in the north. Greece bankrolls the south. The European Union calls the whole island a member. Russia funnels billions through its banks. And Britain still controls 2 full military bases. Cyprus is just 1.2 million people, smaller than most European cities, yet it ranks among the world's top 3 countries for UN troop density per capita, proof that size has nothing to do with strategic weight. It sits on offshore gas reserves, hosts some of the most valuable runways in the Mediterranean, and holds the key to how Turkey, the EU, and NATO interact. So, stick with me, because this isn't just a frozen conflict. It's an economy, a textbook example of how keeping a problem unsolved can make everyone richer, except the people living in it. This is Cyprus, the business of a country divided. Welcome to Empire Secrets. In 1974, Cyprus was torn apart. A Greek-backed coup tried to annex the island, and within days, Turkey invaded. The clashes ended quickly, but their legacy has lasted generations. The UN drew what became known as the Green Line, a buffer zone slicing 180 kilometers across the island and straight through Nicosia, the capital. What was meant as a temporary line was hardened into Europe's last divided capital. Walk its streets today and you'll see cafes, shops, even schools, abruptly halted by sandbags, barbed wire, and UN checkpoints. It's like someone dropped Berlin's Wall into the middle of a holiday brochure. For Cypriots, the human cost was immediate. Nearly 200,000 people were displaced from their homes, roughly 1 in every 3 Cypriots at the time. To put it into perspective, proportionally, that's more displacement than London during the Blitz. The financial toll was staggering, billions of dollars in land and assets locked away, unusable for half a century. For the businesses, hotels and farms left stranded in the buffer zone, value simply evaporated. But for the bigger powers circling Cyprus, division became leverage. Turkey entrenched itself into the north, stationing tens of thousands of troops and guaranteeing influence over every negotiation. Greece tied its political capital to the south, turning the Republic of Cyprus into a symbol of European democracy under siege. And the UN presence itself became a permanent fixture, with 800 plus peacekeepers today costing roughly $55 million annually, paid not by Cyprus but by international donors. An international acknowledgement that this conflict is too profitable, too strategic to fully resolve. The Green Line isn't just a scar on the map, it's an economy of paralysis, where frozen assets, stalled negotiations, and half-promises of reunification all become bargaining chips. A conflict that refuses to end, because for the powers invested in it, stalemate pays. The buffer zone, 5 decades later, is still there. And trust me, nothing lasts longer than a temporary solution when big powers benefit from it. When Turkey invaded Cyprus, it claimed it was protecting the island's Turkish minority. Half a century later, Ankara still calls it a peace operation. But the reality is clearer. The north is Turkey's largest overseas base, and its presence is permanent leverage. Today, around 40,000 Turkish troops remain stationed in northern Cyprus, the highest soldier-to-civilian ratio anywhere in Europe. About 1 Turkish soldier for every 5 northern Cypriots, more than the entire Cypriot National Guard in the south. Their presence isn't just symbolic, It means every negotiation starts with a military imbalance that Turkey can cash in at any moment. Beyond soldiers, Turkey has reshaped the North's entire economy. The Turkish lira is the currency. Universities, banks, and construction companies are funded by Ankara. Tens of thousands of Turkish settlers have moved in, changing demographics and ensuring loyalty. Northern Cyprus trades almost exclusively with Turkey, keeping it locked into dependency. Then there's the sea. Offshore, Cyprus sits on some of the most promising natural gas reserves in the Mediterranean, with estimates of over 4.5 trillion cubic feet in the Aphrodite field alone, with tens of billions of dollars at today's energy prices. Ankara refuses to recognize the Republic of Cyprus's exclusive economic zone and instead claims overlapping waters. Turkish drill ships, escorted by Navy frigates, have carried out surveys in contested blocks, sending a clear signal: if gas wealth is to be unlocked, Turkey expects a share. This mix of troops on land and warships at sea gives Ankara constant leverage. It doesn't need to solve the Cyprus problem. Keeping it unresolved is already a victory. Every round of peace talks, every EU summit, every energy deal in the Eastern Mediterranean must account for the fact that Turkey holds the strongest hand on the ground. For Turkey, Cyprus, it's a live asset, one that guarantees influence in Europe's backyard and keeps Ankara at the center of Mediterranean energy politics. For Greece, Cyprus is more than a distant cousin in the Mediterranean. It's a symbol of shared identity and a political anchor in Europe. When Turkey planted troops in the north, Athens doubled down on its role as the South's protector. Since then, Greece has poured billions into Cyprus through defense cooperation, trade, and financial support, with Greek state aid and credit lines exceeding €3 billion since the 1980s, not counting the joint military programs Athens still subsidizes. The Greek and Cypriot militaries train together, share intelligence, and coordinate strategy, because for Athens, a weak Cyprus means a stronger Turkey, and that is unacceptable. Culturally, the connection is unbreakable. Greek is the dominant language in the south. The Orthodox Church wields political influence, and Athens has positioned itself as the South's voice on the European stage. Cyprus doesn't just fly the EU flag, it flies the Greek flag too. But let's not romanticize. This is strategy, not charity. By supporting Cyprus, Greece projects its influence into the Eastern Mediterranean. Every dispute over maritime borders, energy exploration, or military exercises links back to the Cyprus question, and Athens knows that keeping the Republic of Cyprus close strengthens its hand in Brussels, where EU decisions often comes down to who frames the narrative first. Yet Greece also shoulders the risk. Any flare-up in Cyprus forces Athens into confrontation with Turkey, its historical rival and NATO ally, and every failed round of negotiations exposes Greece's limited power against Ankara's military muscle. Still, for Athens, Cyprus is worth the cost, because without it, Greece would be boxed into the Aegean, sidelined in EU debates, and stripped of a critical card in its rivalry with Turkey. Cyprus may be small, but for Greece, it's a lifeline, a reminder that in geopolitics, identity and influence are inseparable. Athens calls the island its brother nation. It funds trains and backs the south at every turn. But here's the thing, family support is never free. Greece pays in cash, and it cashes out in influence. In 2004, the Republic of Cyprus joined the European Union. On paper, the entire island became part of the EU. In reality, EU law applies only to the south. The north remains legally inside Europe, but suspended from its rules, a paradox that Brussels has never solved. For the EU, Cyprus is both an asset and a liability. It gives Brussels a strategic foothold in the Eastern Mediterranean, complete with access to offshore gas reserves and a vote in European decision-making. But it also imports a problem that Europe can't fix, a divided member state, hosting foreign troops and locked in a frozen conflict. Attempts to flex economic power have fallen flat. The EU has issued statements, warnings, and even sanctions against Turkey for drilling in contested waters, but Ankara has just shrugged them off. European warships rarely challenge Turkish naval patrols. The message is clear: the EU has rules, but little muscle in the Eastern Med. This weakness turns Cyprus into leverage against the entire bloc. Every time Turkey negotiates with Brussels, whether on migration, trade or security, it can dangle Cyprus as a bargaining chip. Greece uses the same card in reverse, tying its national disputes with Turkey to broader EU decisions. And then there's the money. Enormous sum in EU development funds flow into the south, over 6.4 billion euros between 2007 and 2020, making Cyprus one of the EU's largest aid recipients per capita, keeping its economy stable and its loyalty intact. Meanwhile, the unresolved status of the North Bloc's investment, infrastructure and international recognition. This imbalance ensures Cyprus remains a two-speed economy, half inside the EU's richest club, half trapped in diplomatic limbo. For Brussels, Cyprus is a problem that can't be ignored, but also one that can't be solved without confronting Turkey head-on. And as long as Europe avoids that fight, the decision remains an open wound inside the Union itself. You see, guys, Brussels loves writing rules, but without teeth, they're just very expensive PDFs. If Turkey supplies the soldiers and Greece supplies the lifeline, Russia supplies the money. For decades, Cyprus has been Moscow's financial backdoor to Europe. By the 1990s, as Russian oligarchs sought safe havens for their wealth, Cypriot banks opened their doors. Billions of dollars flowed through the island, much of it hidden behind shell companies and secrecy laws. At one point, Russian capital accounted for almost a third of all bank deposits in Cyprus. In 2012, Cypriot banks held an estimated 20 billion euros in Russian funds, nearly the size of the island's GDP that year. Entire sectors of the southern economy, real estate, shipping, luxury services, were built on this money. It went beyond banking. Cyprus ran a controversial golden passport scheme that granted EU citizenship to wealthy foreigners in exchange for investment, handing out over 7,000 passports between 2013 and 2020. Thousands of Russians bought their way into Europe this way, securing travel rights, tax advantages, and a shield of legitimacy. For Cyprus, it meant fast cash. For Moscow's elite, it meant access. But the relationship cut both ways. When the Eurozone crisis hit in 2013, Cyprus's banks nearly collapsed, dragging Russian deposits with them. And after the war in Ukraine, EU sanctions put unprecedented pressure on Cyprus to close its doors to Russian money. Billions were frozen or forced out. Yet even under sanctions, the shadow remains. Russian businesses still hold assets through proxies, and Cyprus's role as a financial middleman is far from over. For Moscow, the island has always been more than a beach paradise. It's been a gateway into Europe's economy, a place where influence could be bought as easily as property. And for Cyprus, the dependence came at a cost. Every euro earned from Russian capital deepened the island's entanglement in global politics. It turned its banks into battlegrounds and its passports into commodities, a reminder that even in a divided country, money flows where power allows it. And let's be honest, when you can buy EU citizenship with a beach villa, who needs democracy? Beneath Cyprus waters lie some of the most contested resources in the Mediterranean. In 2011, the discovery of the Aphrodite gas field ignited a new scramble. Its reserves alone could supply Cyprus's domestic energy demand for over 200 years. Estimates suggest billions of cubic meters of natural gas sit offshore, enough to transform the island into an energy hub, if it only could be extracted. But here's the catch: gas doesn't just sit in the seabed, it sits on maps, and maps are contested. The Republic of Cyprus has issued exploration licenses to energy giants like ExxonMobil and Eni. Turkey rejects them, sending its own drill ships into overlapping zones, guarded by naval frigates. Each new survey is a reminder that energy, more than peace, dictates the future of the island. At the same time, Cyprus hosts two of the most valuable pieces of real estate in the Mediterranean: the British sovereign bases at Akrotiri and Dikalia. These bases cover nearly 3% of the island's territory and serve as launchpads for surveillance, intelligence, and Middle Eastern operations, an area larger than the entire city of Paris, effectively sovereign British land inside an EU state. They give London, and by extension NATO, a permanent footprint on the island, regardless of what happens politically. Put the pieces together: gas reserves claimed by rival powers, shipping lanes that cross the Suez-Gibraltar corridor, and military infrastructure that can't be moved. Cyprus is less an island than a chessboard. Every well drilled, every runway extended, every ship stationed here is another chip in a global game that goes far beyond Cypriot borders. For the powers involved, the stalemate is convenient. As long as the island remains divided, energy development is stalled, ownership contested, and negotiations never final. But that very uncertainty is valuable because it keeps Cyprus in the headlines of diplomacy, in the budgets of militaries, and in the calculations of global energy markets. Gas and bases, 2 assets, 5 players, and one tiny island that refuses to stay quiet. For the outside powers, Cyprus is strategy. For the people who live there, it's a daily contradiction. In Nicosia, families live just streets apart, yet under 2 different governments. Some cross checkpoints daily to shop, study, or work on the other side. Others have never returned to the homes their parents lost in 1974. Half a century on, property deeds are still contested, inheritance claims still tied up in court, entire villages left in limbo. Economically, division comes at a cost. The Republic of Cyprus in the south enjoys EU membership, access to European markets, and the promise of energy riches. If they can be tapped, the north, by contrast, remains isolated, dependent on Turkish subsidies, cut off from the international trade. For every Cypriot who benefits from EU programs, another lives in a place where a passport is recognized by no one. Yet in between, daily life carries on. Cafes buzz along the buffer zone, students from both sides meet at shared events, and younger generations question why their future must be dictated by the past. But here's the reality. Reunification isn't a dream everyone shares. In the 2004 Annan Plan referendum, 76% of Greek Cypriots rejected it, while 65% of Turkish Cypriots supported it. 2 communities, 2 visions, still worlds apart. And so, the people of Cyprus live in the shadow of other nations' interests. Their island is used as a card in negotiations far bigger than themselves. Migration deals with the EU, energy bargaining in the Med, NATO's internal rivalries. The cost of division isn't just political, it's measured in lost opportunities, stranded assets, and generations forced to adapt to a conflict that outsiders profit from. But locals still endure. Every peace plan promises a brighter future. Every referendum divides opinion. At this point, Cypriots have heard more historic deals than wedding vows, and just as many have collapsed before the honeymoon. Half a century after the guns fell silent, Cyprus has hosted 60+ failed negotiation rounds since 1974. That's more peace talks than years of actual peace. The island of Cyprus remains frozen in time. 2 flags, 2 economies, and 1 line that no one dares erase. For Turkey, it is permanent leverage. For Greece, a lifeline. For the European Union, a wound that undermines its authority. For Russia, a financial gateway. For Britain, a strategic base. Each outside power has carved value out of division, and that's the paradox. The Cyprus problem is not unsolved because it's impossible, it's unsolved because, for the players who matter, stalemate is more profitable than peace. But for Cypriots themselves, it's a different story. Displaced families, stranded assets, and futures shaped by a conflict older than most of the people living through it. So the question is not why Cyprus remains divided, the question is who would actually gain if it were ever reunited. This is Empire's Secrets. Thanks for watching, you're a legend. Subscribe now for more investigations into the world's hidden power plays. Your desire, your empire.